All right. Hi, my name is Layla Gentil,
I am Marcus Rosati.
and this is Passport Necessary. This is a podcast that is going to be going into what it means to be a TCK right now, and how we've grown up and how that's affected the way we are now as adults. Marcus, what is a TCK?
Well, TCK stands for Third Culture Kid. It's essentially someone who's grown up in a country or society that is outside of the society that their parents grew up in or come from, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it, you could be a TCK pretty much anywhere these days. I mean, if I grew up in Japan. Uh, Parents are both from the UK, so I was moved out there when I was a month old, I think it was. At least that's what my alien registration card says. Um, so spent 18 years there. Both my parents, I suppose, could be kind of characterised as third culture kids as well. My dad grew up in France. My mum grew up in Iran. They both lived in the UK, met in the UK, and then decided that they could take jobs in Japan. So we ended up out there.
That's awesome. That's so cool. I am a third culture kid. Both of my parents are very much from their own cultures. I automatically would have been a TCK just from the fact that my father is French and my mother is an American. But then my parents decided to take it a step further. I was born in Louisiana, and then my mom joined uh, you know, worked for the State Department, and so because of that, we had to travel a lot. I've lived in South Korea, Guatemala, Japan, France. I did 2 summers in Algeria while I was in college, but I did my final schooling, college schooling, here in the United States, and I've been living here since then. Um, but because I grew up most of my life outside of the U.S., I would definitely consider myself as a TCK.
That's good. It, it's one of those things, though, isn't it? Being like you're having such a broader background with two parents from different places, or at least parents who have grown up in different places. It does do sometimes wonder whether it does have an effect on the choices that people make later on in their own lives, in terms of being
Mm.
mobile, in a sense, wanting to go and see things and do stuff, and being a bit more adventurous, maybe, in a certain sense.
Oh, yeah, I definitely think that was part of it because I mean, my dad loved to travel even as a young man. Like he tells stories about going to different countries. Like I think at one point he went to Brazil.
Hmm.
Like I remember him telling me that. So like I know that for them traveling was already something that they were interested in doing from the get-go. So when they my mom got that job, it was like,
Hmm.
oh, well, you're going to be traveling. That's part of it. And they were like, cool, let's just do it. So, and I think for my parents, another big part of it was, you know, both of my parents are teachers.
Yeah.
That's their professions that they started off with. Um, and so they knew that if they stayed in Louisiana, that my brother and I were not going to get the education that they wanted us to
Hmm.
get, um, because both fortunately and unfortunately, international schooling is like probably some of the best that you can get,
Yeah.
like especially within the United States. So my parents really wanted us to have a good education outside of having to go to private schools.
Yeah.
So that was one of the benefits of traveling the way we did. We got very lucky and we went to a lot of really good schools, which I realized very quickly when I came back to the States for my university degree. I was like, oh, okay, we're at a different place educationally, but it's not it's not it's more of a knock on how the education system in the United States is really a disservice to a lot of students and not on the students themselves.
Yeah.
But that will definitely be a topic for another
Yeah.
podcast. So I wanted to get into some frequently asked questions
Yeah.
that we get, especially being third culture kids. The biggest one is, where are you from? I know
Yeah.
that you get this one a
Yeah.
lot.
Well, because in my job I sort of like work in customer facing stuff, so I see a lot of people, and they pick up on my accent. So because my parents are from different ends of the UK, so my mother's from the north and my dad's from the south, so you get there are differences in accent. It's a bit difficult to go into it if you're not familiar with it, but there are certain ways of pronouncing A's and things like that that people will pick up on. So people from the north thinking from the south, and people from the south thinking from the north. So people frequently ask, "Where are you from?" And it becomes a
Mm-hmm.
bit difficult because you're kind of going, "Well, there's depending on the day, depending on how much time you've got, you'll either go into a full explanation of where you've lived, what you've done, all that sort of stuff, or if it's a busy day, it's just like, oh, I've lived everywhere." That
Mm-hmm.
seems to sort of do it for most people. So I've
Of
moved around
course,
a
I
lot.
I
I
don't want to get into
I haven't
it.
got the time at the moment. There's a queue,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's funny because people get curious because they can hear, particularly in the UK. I mean, I suppose it happens in America as well, but like they pick up on accents, and
Hmm.
there is a clear difference between northern and southern accents, and I have sort of a mixture of the two. There are
Yeah.
just some words that sound different.
Yeah, I kind of have something similar. Definitely more when I speak French than when I speak
Mm.
English. When I speak French, I have a lingering American accent. Just there are certain words that I speak, and it has a little bit of a linger. Also, the fact that I sometimes use the wrong uh, le and la, like
Yeah,
masculinizing and feminizing certain words. I get them mixed up, and French people notice that immediately. They're like, "Oh, where are you from?" I'm like, oh, damn it. I thought I was doing so good. Um, but I definitely, I do get that sometimes in the States, just because I use certain terms that are considered very Southern, like
mm.
saying y'all. I say that all the time.
Right.
I call a lot of people hun or honey, like, and
All right.
everyone is ma'am or sir to me, just because that's like a very Southern thing. You start, like, you don't call people, it's just a weird like way of like
Mm-hmm.
talking to people. You just, everyone's ma'am or sir, it's just automatic. um, and I know, especially when I was working my customer server jobs, people would be like, oh wait, you said y'all, you're like, where are you from? And I'm like, I'm from Louisiana. Like, wow, you really don't have an accent. It's like, yep. On a busy day, that was my only answer, because I was like, I'm just too busy. But um, yeah, like actually, quite a few of the people on my Louisiana side of the family don't have a very strong Louisiana accent,
Mm.
um, for multiple different reasons. But yeah, it's definitely something I've gotten, and it's especially when I bring up the fact that I speak another language, that
Yeah.
always gets a reaction to it. People are always like, "Oh, so you're not from the U.S." And it's like, I was born here. I just didn't live here most of my
Yeah.
life, but I am technically American. I got that passport, bro.
That's what America's all about.
Yeah, got that passport. It's all good. Um, so, do you feel more blank or blank is another
Oh yeah.
common question. I definitely get this. I don't know if you get it as much because I am binational. I have both American and French citizenship. I get that question a lot. Do
Mm.
you get something similar?
Not so much. I think because I don't naturally have the sort of like the binational thing, and most of the time, because my accent's not really been heavily affected, people, unless I tell them that I grew up abroad, then they're not going to be they're not going to notice necessarily. They'll be kind of like, oh, which part of the UK are you from? But particularly when you start saying that you grew up in Japan, they tend to ask, it's like more, do you miss it? That
Mm-hmm.
tends to be more how they ask it. Um, I don't know. It's funny because like how you feel about being in a country. I mean, it's quite a big deal because I certainly don't. I don't feel English,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't mind saying that I'm British.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bit of a kind of a difference in terms of the politics, but I think but then I don't feel entirely British either because there are things that people will say and they kind of go, it's just like, oh yeah, but do you remember this from our childhood? No, why not?
Oh
I
my
wasn't
gosh, that
here.
happens. That happens so often. That
It's,
happens so
yeah,
often.
it's like there are cultural cues that you miss sometimes, or references that you don't understand because you just weren't there for them. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you do kind of like you don't feel excluded, but you do feel slightly alien. if that's the way
Mhm.
of putting it. You're on the outside.
Yeah, always it's always going to be an element of outsidership.
Mm.
That's part of being a TCK, I think. Um, I think for me, do I it's hard question to answer, do I feel more for
Mm.
me American or French, because I've lived in the US more than I've lived in France, and I'm much closer to my American roots than I am to my French roots.
Mm.
Um, I mean, I still feel very much French in certain ways that I approach food, or I approach just like certain like elements of like prudishness, or
Mm.
certain ways of discussing things. I know that that tends to lean more French. Um, but I mean, I also know that I'm quite American. I've been fairly Americanized. I spent most of my schooling in American school systems, so that
Yeah.
in that sense I am very American. But I can't really choose one or the other, because to me it's
Yeah.
like a mixed identity. They've kind of melded into this one thing that if I didn't have one, I could not be the other. Like, I don't
Yeah.
fit in
Yeah.
perfectly in the States. I don't fit in perfectly in France. I don't think I would fit perfectly anywhere, because this mix of culture is too ingrained in me.
Yeah, and it's a funny thing is that there are some things that I see, particularly because like, I was in American schools, so essentially they were an international schools, but they had an American curriculum. There were a lot of
Hmm.
American people there, and I sometimes, there are some things I look at British people doing is like, the Americans wouldn't do it like that. Just come on,
Hmm.
let's just have some more, let's have a bit more oomph, please. Can we, a bit more like can-do attitude, a bit more kind of,
Hmm.
exuberance. I think there is a kind of an exuberance in American culture. There are some times when I look at British people, you kind of go, I feel more American than you do. It's like because you know British people
Yeah.
sort of
Well.
like kind of like slagging off Americans sometimes. It's kind of like they're joking, but the thing is you do kind of
Hmm.
feel a bit like, yeah, but I think part of the problem is that you don't quite get it. Like it's not
Hmm.
that they're being rude or brash or anything like that. It's just the way that the culture works. There is that kind of
It's the
much
way
more
we are.
exuberant thing.
It's
Yeah,
Yeah, it's definitely very that.
yeah.
um,
It's
it's very interesting, and it's always been a question that I struggle with a lot, and I think I've just come to a point where it's like I don't feel more one or another.
mm,
They're just both part of who I am.
yeah. I think it's got to point out. It's not to say that the people are being mean to you or anything like that. It's just they're curious, but it's just one of those
Hmm.
funny ones. It's like there are questions that people ask you that sort of it, it's kind of weird. It might come up a couple of times in this particular episode, but like there are questions you can't answer in a way that would make sense to anybody else. That's the kind of thing. The
Hmm.
interesting thing is like, and it's a funny discussion because you kind of have a reflexive thing of looking at yourself a bit more and questioning as how well. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that question before because you wouldn't think to ask it of yourself. When somebody asks it of you, you kind of go, "Oh, I hadn't thought about
Yeah, we kind of take it for granted. There's certain things that like you're so used to it
that."
from the way you grew up that you're just kind of like that's just how it is. And for anyone else, it would be like that's weird.
Yeah.
And it takes someone else telling you it's weird that you're like, oh yeah, maybe it is weird. um, so I get this question a lot because I've lived in many countries. I don't know if you get this question. You may do just because you have the two countries that you've lived between. But what was it slash is your favorite country?
Mm. I do get which one do you like better.
Okay, yeah. Well, because you
Like,
have the two. Yeah.
yeah. And the thing is that there are differences between the two. I don't think I actually ended up liking either country the better. I mean, I've travelled about. It's just like
No,
because
I know what you
you
mean.
can't negate everything because they're just different. There are aspects that you
Hmm.
like about one country and aspects you don't like about the other, or whatever. But then it will be balanced out in different ways. And like, I've been to a few other countries as well as part of travel, and they're just things you pick up and you just kind of go, "Well, I like that about this country. I like that about this country." And then there's
Hmm.
sometimes you can go, "Not so keen on that bit," but
Yeah, I think it's hard. It's hard when people ask questions that are they're I'm looking for the word and I can't think of what it is. They're fully opposite questions where it's like you like one or the other.
it's
It's
binary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so binary, and I think that with questions like this, especially for me, having been in so many, like you can't answer it in a binary way. Like
No.
they all have their own thing that worked for them and didn't work for them. Like I loved living in Guatemala. It was
Hmm.
beautiful. The people were so warm and they were friendly and they were so welcoming. Like if someone invited you into your home, like you were going to get fed. They were going to be so kind to you. The music was lively and everything was just bright and colorful, and I loved it there, but
Hmm.
it was also kind of dangerous
Yeah.
and you had to be careful. You couldn't go out at night and walk around, especially as just a single woman who looked like a foreigner. Like you
Yeah.
would have someone who would approach you with a knife or a gun and who would rob you. Like that was just, it was something that was very much instilled in us very quickly when we lived there. Like you have to be careful there. I knew multiple friends of mine while living in Guatemala who had their house broken into.
Right.
It it was just normal. It was,
Yeah.
and we were considered to be in like a very safe area of the city. Um, but then like living in Japan, I loved how much freedom I had. I was a
Hmm.
teenager. I wanted to wander around and like go to all these new places and experience things for the first time. And I really could just kind of travel on my own. I would come home very late at night, um, just because I did a lot of after school projects and I
Yeah.
was in theater, so rehearsals and stuff. But I never felt unsafe walking around by myself. I never had to worry about my physical safety. um, I could definitely tell that there was a lot of um, repression in the culture.
Yeah.
So being an outsider was a benefit while living in Japan, but there were certain things that like I could tell would have really bothered me if I lived there on a more permanent basis. But
Yeah.
because I was there for a short amount of time, it was like, well, eventually we'll leave and it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
And then like I loved France because I knew how to speak. I could easily communicate there. I'm half French. I'm able to travel there no problems. I definitely felt like I could connect a little bit more to my culture, um, because growing up in all those countries, I learned French, but like really learning French culture, you kind of
Hmm.
have to live there. I
Yeah.
love the food. Oh my god, Americans don't understand how good fresh produce is.
Right.
when I was when I was in college, I told my mom this, and she died laughing when I told her this. I was finishing up my freshman year, and I was going to go back to France for the summer, and I was having dreams up till the week that I was leaving of fresh fruit. Like I was just dreaming of fresh fruit and vegetables because I was missing it so
Yeah.
much. So when I got to France, my mom was like, "Hey, what's the first meal you want?" I was like, "I want a salad. I want a wonderful, fresh, beautiful salad with all these vegetables in it." And she was like, "Yes, we can do that." I love that. But with France, I didn't like how dirty it was. I know that's a stereotype, but it's kind of true. It was kind of dirty. It wasn't always safe.
Mm.
Sometimes people were a little brusque. But I mean, I also lived in New York, and that's kind of the same thing. It's
Yeah.
just very, very large cities kind of tend to attract that.
Which part
So
of France
yeah,
did you go to? That's a good question, actually.
I lived in Paris
Ah, right.
for 2 years. Yeah, I lived in the city of Paris, in the 16th arrondissement or the
Hmm.
17th. I think it was the 17th because the second time my parents were in the 16th arrondissement. But we did travel to like Saint Malo, and we went to Normandy, which is where my
Hmm.
dad's from. So we did travel to that area quite a bit. We still went outside of Paris while we lived there, but yeah, we lived in the city
Yeah.
itself.
I mean, the big city thing does tend to make a bit of a difference. I suppose there is that. I mean, you
Oh
notice
yeah.
you notice the differences between sort of like because I'm living in York in the UK at the moment, but I spent 2 years in London, and definitely the attitudes are very different. People in York are very friendly. It's a very safe city. It's just about the most safe city in Britain, I think, or at least in England. And I don't know if this is still true, but basically it's got a reputation for being the bicycle theft capital of England. That's what you've got to worry about in York. My
That's
bike's been stolen. That's it. That's what you've got to worry
the
about.
weirdest fact.
Apparently, it's true, and people keep repeating it. So it's the bike
That's
theft capital of the UK. And you're like, okay,
that is so weird.
but if that's the worst that's going to happen to you, I mean,
Oh yeah. Oh, that was another thing that like in Japan, you could just leave your bike anywhere, it didn't have to be
yes,
locked. No one was
yes,
gonna touch your bike. Like theft of any kind, any sort of like danger, like immediate physical bodily harm, was such an anomaly in Japan. That was a big thing I had to learn when I was moving from Japan to France. Was like that was the first time I got a cell phone. Was actually when I was in France because my parents were like, "We know you're still going to do theater and do after school things, but we need to be able to communicate with you
Yeah.
because we need to know you're going to get home safe." And like that was wild to me
Yeah.
because and up until then I had been in environments where we were still kind of protected. Like in Japan, everyone was going to protect you. When I was living in Guatemala, like it wasn't safe, but we were always in situations where there was adult supervision, or we
Hmm.
would be inside the
Yeah.
house, or like
Yeah.
there was always a way of like making sure we stayed safe.
Yeah.
Um, but then like moving to France, where I was a teen, like an adult, almost an adult. I think by the time I left, I was legally an adult in France.
Hmm.
You know, having to deal with being a young woman, um, definitely presenting as a woman in a country where catcalling is a thing, um, and they actively do it, and it was just weird because
Hmm.
no one would have done that in Japan.
No. No.
It was unfathomable for that to happen, and then being in France where it was like it was common.
Hmm.
It was just very weird, and then coming back to the States was a huge culture shock
Yeah.
because all the kids who were my age, like they had all these cultural references and they all knew these certain topics and things, and I just didn't. I had no idea. And my first year, definitely my first semester, was kind of me kind of crumbling in and just trying to like figure out where I wanted to be. And then this any year after that, it was like, oh, I'm very comfortable with who I
Yeah.
am. Now I just need to feel comfortable around other people being myself. Like that
Yeah.
that was kind of a weird transition.
It's funny because I just kind of think there's I think for me certainly when I came to the UK in 2009, I think there was a bit of a reconstruction process. You just sort of realised that you couldn't have you could be exceedingly polite like the Japanese were, and you could
Hmm.
have the kind of like almost American outgoingness, and people didn't like either. It was kind of strange that they found it
Hmm.
all a bit too much in some ways,
Hmm.
or that this isn't how we do things here, or this isn't the way to do things. And you kind of go, yeah, but it works for other people, so why can't it work here? It's one of those funny things, and it's strange. I mean, British people like to see
Hmm.
themselves as being really sort of out there and kind of I don't know
Accepting.
accepting and also sort of like quite liberated and liberal in some ways.
Hmm.
But then you also have the pushback against that. I mean,
Yeah.
English people think that the French are absolutely mental because they kind of go, they do all this strange stuff. What are we going to do? It's a kind of like it's cliche, but it's kind of true. Is that English people do? English people are frightened of the French. I think they see them as too liberated. So it's
We're
too much.
so liberated. Oh, can't
But
have that kind of freedom.
but then they kind of like, yeah. So we can't do that. It's not cricket. You can't do it. No,
I love that saying
I
because
know
it makes no
it
sense to
doesn't.
Americans. Americans are like, what? The sport? What are you talking
It's not
about?
playing by the rules. Can't do that. It
Is I am curious about that saying. Is it because cricket has so many rules?
probably is. It's the
Oh,
idea of
okay.
they talk about the idea of fair play and all the rules. And it's supposed to be a sport for gentlemen and all that sort of thing. So the idea is that you're playing by the rules. You're doing everything in the right
Okay.
way. You know,
Got
you're
it,
not
got
like
it.
running up
Okay.
to somebody with a bat and hitting them with it. You know,
I would love to see that.
I've seen somebody chasing someone with a cricket bat before.
Because that
It's
shit
funny.
hurts, right?
I don't know. I've not been on the receiving end, but I assume it does.
Because it's like a solid piece of wood, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh my god, I would not want to be hit by a cricket bat. Honestly, I wouldn't want to be hit by a normal American baseball bat
No.
either, because that's pretty solid too, and it's like that shit would hurt.
Yeah.
That was also like just like sports in general in the States are like so passionate.
Mm.
People are so into it, and I was like, I have no context. Like literally no clue about what you're talking about. We kind of learned about it when we were in school, but it was from a very like distant learning process where it was like, okay, now we're going to do baseball. And it was like,
Yeah.
we don't know what we're doing. but we'll follow the rules you tell us to follow.
I mean, it's kind of the one funny thing is that one of the sports that you definitely see pretty much everybody will do is football slash soccer. That's
Yeah,
pretty much everybody gets into that because it's straightforward and it's simple and it exists everywhere.
it's a ball and you play with your foot. Like,
Yeah,
it's literally the easiest. Anyone can play football.
yeah,
Anyone can play football. Soccer to my American listeners.
but
It's football.
yeah. Because I suppose in the States though, because the country is so big, you can have your own leagues and it doesn't really matter because state can play state. You know.
Yeah. Oh, that was so weird to me when I came here and they were like, "Yeah, we're gonna play the World Series," and I was like, "Oh, what other countries are playing?" And it's like, it's just American cities playing baseball. It's like, so it's not a World Series. It's like, yeah, it is. We've always called it that. I'm like, okay, well, you're not playing the world, so why is it called the World Series?
It's enough.
It's enough. It counts. We are the world.
The thing is that
So shocking as a statement.
well, yeah, no, it's true in the States, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about being in international schools is that you had a lot of people, like particularly from somebody coming from a more British background, is that you had a lot of people from what British people refer to as the Commonwealth, so essentially the ex-colonies. So you'd be people from India, Australia, Pakistan,
Hmm.
and all that sort of stuff. And the thing is that you would have sports that were kind of common, so people could talk about rugby, they could talk
Hmm.
about cricket. Those are sports that people kind of knew. And cricket tended to be one of the ones that was actually quite a good one. It's actually kind of a positive thing about being going abroad to other countries and living there, is you realise that there are people, even in Japan. This just seems really weird. You have a bunch of people who turn up in Japan and then go, "What sport do you like?" "Cricket." "Excellent. We're going to be friends." That's it. It just sounds really strange, but it's true. That's one
I
of the
think
things
I,
about it, which is nice.
I think the thing that a lot of people, and I think that was something that was a frequently asked question for me, would be like, was it difficult? Was it
Mm.
hard living in other countries? Now, I will say, I am a white woman, an American white woman, and you are a white British man.
Mm.
So we're gonna have very different experiences than other TCK people
Yeah.
who are of the BIPOC community.
Mm.
But I think for me, it wasn't hard because I knew I was going into it not always knowing everything. And that was kind of comforting to
Mm.
know that, I was going to every time kind of be starting from scratch and
Yeah.
figuring out my way around this new country and how do I communicate in a way that's clear for everyone? How do I represent myself in a way that is respectful of the country I'm going into without losing myself and my home identity? So I think that was really, um, it wasn't hard. It was more just knowing that I was going to have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was just like, okay, well, starting from scratch again, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
it kind of gives you this way of just being like very scrappy.
Yeah. You can kind of uproot yourself and move on, and people find that a bit strange. I mean, I found it
Hmm.
worse coming back to the UK than I did, like, just lived in Japan, so that was the thing. But coming back to the UK, the thing is that because of my accent and because of what I look like, people just assume that you're going to get on and do things the way that they do them. Because you look and
Hmm.
sound like they do.
Hmm.
In a certain sense, like your style of dress is like, oh yeah, you're this kind of person. You sound very British, and then you start
Hmm.
moving around in the culture and the society. People going, why are you doing that? And why are you doing that? And why are you doing that? It's like, this is what I grew up with. You are sort of, it's that sort of David Bowie thing of the man who fell to earth, isn't it? It's just like a character who looks human and everything like that, but isn't quite going to fit in because they come
Hmm.
from somewhere else.
Yeah, it's
It's
definitely
interesting.
happened to me too. That's happened a lot where it's like you look American, you sound American, you seem to be American, but then like once in a while, it almost feels like you're slipping up, like
Yeah.
you've made the mistake and you've like shown them your true self, and then it's like, oh fuck, like what do I do now? Like there's definitely an element of like, oh, like I need to be careful of how I approach things, or if I do it a certain way, they'll know. And it's like there's nothing wrong with being an outsider, but
No.
and I prefer being an outsider because it gives me a different perspective. But there's definitely an element of like you're almost catching yourself. You're like,
Yeah.
oh man, I did something that an American wouldn't do or a French person wouldn't do. Um, and it's almost you feel sometimes, at least I do. I feel sometimes like people are waiting to catch you
Yeah. Yeah. I would.
doing
Yeah.
something that's not of the norm or not what they expect you to do.
Yeah.
Um, I know some of my friends have done that. Some of my American friends have done that, where they'll be like, "Oh, that was very French of you," or "that was off." And it's
Yeah.
like, I know that. You don't have to rub it in.
Thanks for
I am
telling me.
aware. Yeah, there's always gonna be. I know for me, I will always feel like an outsider, no
Mm.
matter what, and no matter how long I live here. I know that I'm always gonna feel a little bit not part of the group because
Mm.
I wasn't part of the group for so long.
Yeah.
And I honestly don't want to be part of the group.
No. Yeah.
Not 100%.
It does have some limitations, but then it also has lots of positives because it does mean that you can shift in society in a different way. You,
Hmm.
you kind of able to see things in a way of just going, well, I think it makes you a bit more of a. Some people don't like the word, but I think it makes you more of an opportunist. You look at things and kind of go, it's like, okay, these are the things I can see. These are the things I want to do.
Hmm.
Because you don't. It does shut some doors in a certain sense. You're never going to feel like you totally belong, but at the same
Hmm.
time, it does give you the ability to kind of be sort of more nimble, maybe than some other people, because you know
Hmm.
you already don't fit. So if you choose to do something, you are doing it on your own terms in a certain sense. You're not having to sort of like push against everybody because you're already outside it.
Hmm.
You
Oh
can,
yeah, I totally agree.
it's a strange thing. It's like, if somebody goes, "Well, do you seem a bit odd?" It's kind of like, well, yeah, because I didn't grow up here. That's why I seem odd. And people kind of have to go, yeah, okay. Not what you
Yeah,
would say to that. So I was like, no, there isn't anything you can say to that. Nothing
yeah.
wrong with it. It's just you're on a
It is who
slightly
you
different,
are.
yeah, you're just on a slightly different sort of footing than they are,
Hmm. I agree.
which is nice in some ways.
Yeah. So with that fun note, we're gonna wrap it up for this episode. If you have questions for Passport Necessary, you can leave it in the comment section. You can also reach out to me. I have a Twitter. My Twitter is at Layla Gentil, so LeylaGentil, and you can send your questions there. If we, get questions, we'll reply to them when we can. We're also going to be doing topics as we move forward, and hopefully some interviews from
Which would be
different
fun.
people because we want to get their different like growing up stories because every TCK has a slightly different story and we want to hear about them. So yeah, do you have anything else to add?